Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the meeting. My name is Simon Dennis. I'm Corporate Director for the Office for Policing, Fire, Crime and Commissioning as part of the York and North Yorkshire Combined Authority. It's my pleasure to introduce to the Chair this afternoon, Joe Coles, who is the Mayor's Deputy Mayor for Policing, Fire and Crime. So without further ado, Joe, I'd invite you to take the chair.
Thank you, Simon, and welcome everybody. This is an online public meeting, and we will be talking about police performance, and then we'll have a spotlighted section about the theme of hidden crime. Just before we start the first section on performance, we have apologies from the Chief Constable, who is on leave this week. And also just to remind people that there aren't minutes from these meetings, but the recording of the last meeting is available on the website if people want to refer back to it. So without further ado, I'll pass over to Deputy Chief Constable Bissett, who is going to take us through the performance section, and we'll do it slide by slide. And if people officers on the call who want to come in can just indicate that they want to, and I'll bring people in. I've got some questions as well, but I'll take other questions first.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Good afternoon. So if we take you through the performance section for North Yorkshire Police first, we'll go on to the first slide, please. So the first slide describes North Yorkshire Police's performance in relation to emergency 999 calls. And you'll see at the top of the slide, this is over a period of the last 12 months from July last year to the 30th of June this year. So if I can go to the first table on the left-hand side of the slide, you'll see there the blue bars describe the volume of calls that we take. Just worth noting that we are in our busiest time of year at the moment, and that's fairly consistent across year on year. So we would usually start seeing a rise in call demand in March and April, reaching a peak really in July and August for the police. What the dark blue line demonstrates is the amount of calls that we answer within what we'd call the SLA, the service level agreement. So that's, we aim to answer 90% of all 999 calls within 10 seconds of receiving them. It's also important to highlight that we measure that from the point at which the call hits the force control room. So the process will be a member of the public will dial 999, they would then go through to BT, and that call will then be passed to us. And it's from that point that we then start measuring how quickly we answer it. So you can clearly see on there that we are, aside of a period in about December of last year, we're slightly under the 90% mark for percentage of nines answered in 10 seconds. We do take it over the year. So we do accept when it's busier, there might be a slight decline in that performance. And it can get really busy as well. And we also do take calls on behalf of other forces intermittently. So notably Humberside, if they will have an outage on their 9 system, we would start taking their 999 calls. And similarly, other forces would do that for us if we had an IT problem. I think the history is important here. You can clearly see that around a year ago, we were some way short of the 90%. That's pretty much consistently improved with the level of staffing that we're getting into the room. And there are further plans for more recruitment in September. And I'm confident by the end of this year that we'll get some real consistency around the 90% mark, excepting when it gets much busier, that might dip slightly. So that's the first table at the top. The table underneath describes the hard physical number of calls that we take within certain time periods. So you can see there, the vast majority of calls are taken 0 to 10 seconds, as the top graph describes. And as we go down, it takes longer and longer. The reasons for the length of calls being longer can very much depend on concurrency of people ringing us. So, for example, if we were to get a serious road traffic accident at a certain location in the force area, we might have a flood of calls that all came in at once and the room can't deal with them. It doesn't mean that we're not aware of the incident. It just means that a number of people have rung at once. And that tends to be the reason why you get those kind of very small numbers, admittedly, but 2-minute waits. but we aim to answer every one in under that 10 seconds. And the maximum wait time you can see there at the time that's articulated at 3 minutes 20. If we just have a move to the table on the right, you can see the call volume in that period, about 113,000, give or take, calls to North Yorkshire Police, an average time of 7 seconds in that period. Once we start moving through this year, you can see the months of poorer performance from last year will drop off and that average will fall, and that's what we'd expect. But a slight decline in 999 calls of about 3% over last year. But we're still confident that the amount of resources we've got going into the room will enable us to improve performance in this area. And happy to take any questions.
Brilliant, thank you for that. Can I see any indications of people who have questions? Otherwise, I will jump in. Simon, do you want to come in?
Yes, just one question. I hope it's not taking ground that you were intended to take, Deputy Mayor, but I just wanted to ask whether NYP's calculations in relation to call answer times are consistent with the what I understand to be the consensus amongst policing generally, so that force by force comparisons can be made.
Yeah, thank you, Simon. So we are in discussions with BT at the moment about the amount of time it's taking for their transfer of calls to North Yorkshire. We do have towards the top end of a transfer time. I mean, you are talking seconds, but when you are trying to answer a call in under 10 seconds, the way and the methodology by which they transfer that call to us is really important. And as I've said, we do have a slightly longer transfer time than forces around the country. We're not the longest by any means, but every second counts. But in terms of consistency of how we're measuring this, yes, we are consistent. The BT data is slightly different, as I've just explained, but we need to understand how long it takes us to pick that call up once it triggers our systems. And I think it'll come out a bit later on, particularly in the non-urgent calls and the dispatch times, that we do things in a way which better describes the service received by the public. And that's the way we always approach how we measure our performance.
Great, thank you. Does anyone else want to come in before I ask my couple of quick questions on this one? No? Right, in which case, I had a question just whether or not the way that we are recording this is different to other force areas, and kind of unrelatedly, just any insight that you have about what is driving particular peaks and troughs of demand. So if there are particular times of year that are busy, just what it is that's driving that. It may be random, but you said that this is a particularly busy time of year, so just it would be useful to know why. And just finally, if there are any kind of outliers, I think I can't see from the slide how long, but you've got one maximum waiting time of over 3 minutes. So just really whether there's anything you can say about what might have happened in that particular case, because obviously that is a long time for someone on a 999 call. Yeah, those are my 3 questions on that one.
Yeah, okay, no problem. So kind of refer back to the answer given to Simon about we're consistent in how we measure our performance in terms of 999 performance. Most forces are. It's just that bit of work with BT really that we need to make sure that the call is not getting delayed in transfer, and we're being as quickly as we can between us and them. And that's an ongoing discussion with BT at the moment. In terms of why does we get busier? This is a common.
Sorry, just before you move on to that next point, you didn't quite say what we do. What do we do? Do we do anything differently to other force areas? So you know that BT delay, I completely understand, but are other forces having the same issue?
It depends on which force you are in, and that's what we're exploring with BT. So there's nothing we do differently in terms of how we measure. We will measure it as soon as it hits our system. To then when we answer it, it's more understanding. The BT measured the time that they transfer it to us. So they will start the clock, and it's a manual start of the clock in BT. They'll press a button when somebody answers it in North Yorkshire Police. But that's not consistent. The system's not measuring that. It's not an automated way of doing it. So we're exploring with BT how we can automate that so we make it more accurate. So we're clear on the time it's taking to come to us rather than relying on somebody in BT to stop that clock. In terms of consistency and measurement, we do measure consistently from then when it hits our system to when we pick it up.
And do other force areas operate in the same way?
Yes, but that's why we're trying to understand the difference in timing, because you would expect it to be fairly consistent.
Okay, great. Sorry, you were about to talk to me about what was driving the demand, I think.
Yeah. So what's driving demand? So this is a consistent demand picture across a number of, across all forces really, particularly the one I used to work in. Some of it's to do with the nature of how people mix with one another. The weather's better, crime patterns change. So you might, for example, see increases of crime at this time of year, particularly public order. People are outside more, they're together more, there's more nighttime economy. So there's a whole host of reasons really driven by the weather, by how people behave. They tend to be much more at home in the winter, for example. That reduces the ability for crime. It reduces the number of people that are out in public spaces. So that tends to be some of the key drivers around that demand profile changing.
Okay, brilliant. I think that was my 3 things, wasn't it? Oh, the 3-minute call, sorry.
Oh, the 3-minute call, yeah. So this is what I speak about concurrency. So if we were to get a flood of calls at one time, the room does have a limited capacity in how many 9s it can take. We do a lot of demand work to make sure that we've got the right number of people in the room at the right time, but you will always get those exceptions. We can't resource to those exceptions because it would be incredibly expensive to do it for one, and they are exceptional in terms of how often you get those wait times, as you can see from that graph at the bottom. Yeah. So yeah, that's what you tend to see is a glut of demand depending on what type of incidents you're receiving, but it's not common, as you can see from the amount of calls that are over that time.
Great. All right, we can move on.
Okay, so this slide starts describing non-emergency call performance. So this is 101 calls predominantly, although we do get calls coming in through different ways in North Yorkshire. So we can also have people ringing front counters and other non-emergency numbers. So this graph looks it's different to the first one. As you'll see, there's less consistency in it. And one of the reasons for that consistency, the top graph there, and particularly the answer time, is because we changed the methodology for how we describe how quickly or within what service level agreement we answer 101 calls. And that's because nationally they changed the definition. So the Home Office are going to start producing performance tables for each force in terms of their non-emergency 101 call performance. Really important to stress, when this call system was first introduced, it was not just meant to be for police. It was meant to be for a more broad partnership response to non-emergency matters. And I think that's quite important because we do end up picking calls up in the majority where we can refer to other agencies in quite a significant proportion. And that's why we have our service directory at the front end on our website to try and help people better understand who can give them the right answer at the right time. But nevertheless, what you can see there is that variance in SLA performance on non-emergency. This is very dependent on the number of people you've got in the room, and a 999 call will always take precedence over a non-emergency for obvious reasons. Therefore, if you haven't got the requisite number of staffing in the room at the right time, your performance can be variable. So this was the reason why over the last 18 months, we've had a couple of business cases to increase the staffing in the control room. And during September will be the first time that we get to the level of staffing that we described that we require. That's 110 communication officers. For various reasons, York's a fairly tough market in recruiting people. We know that. People who work in local authorities know that. We did a lot of work last year to benchmark our salaries, to look at retention, to understand why we get quite a high turnover. And thankfully, that work's been successful. And we've managed now to nearly get to the numbers that we need. And we'll certainly have them in September. The other thing to note is in September, we've got a switchboard coming into place for the force, which will increase performance in this area again by enabling people to be dedicated to pick up non-emergency calls and online contacts. So if I just go back to that first graph, you can see there much more consistency really around the number of non-emergency calls that come in. What we do know is that if we don't pick up a non-emergency call, people are then tempted to ring 999, which is what we don't want, because obviously there's people ringing. So there is a little bit of a plea from me to the public for a little bit of patience. You can see on the graph underneath the amount of calls that we receive in certain times, and there's a high proportion of those calls that are answered in around 5 minutes for a non-emergency call. The national SLA is 3 minutes. That's what they've set it at. 80% of calls within 3 minutes, where before it was very much left to local determination and police and crime commissioners and mayors to determine what that performance should be. So you can see in that bottom graph there, our current maximum wait time is 2 minutes and 9 seconds. I should also explain that now we have a number of options when you go through on 101, one of which is called Queue Buster, where you can request a call back. We don't drop any of those calls. We give people a ring back, and they're guaranteed to get a ring back actually in a reasonable period. And it helps us manage demand better in that way. And they will get the service that they require when we can give them that service. So we do encourage people to use that, because it's not perhaps as frustrating as being sat on the line for 2 hours. Interestingly, the call at 2 hours and 9 minutes, we had other calls of exactly the same subject that we'd already logged and taken, but you don't know that till you answer the phone. So our current SLA then is at 56%, where we'd want to be at the 80. So that's 80% of calls within 3 minutes, just to stress that. The other thing to note is in the table on the right of that slide, you'll see negative discontinuance. That's a fancy term for hanging up without being answered. So that basically describes where somebody after 3 minutes just puts the phone down. We don't want that. We want to capture the call, ideally through Queue Buster or another method. But that last year would have been in the region of 30%. So we're losing less people because we've introduced new technology. And the 20% positive discontinuance is where people basically hang up before the 3 minutes as a positive, right, I don't want to speak, I might be taking another option. The majority, however, are going through to Queue Buster and other methods now. So this exactly describes how we need to be reporting on national measures. Other forces are not capable of this yet. We've gone early, so we're in line with what the Home Office and others are expecting. So I'll take some questions on that, Joe. I know there's a lot in there on non-emergency, because there's a lot of routes into the organisation, and we have changed a number of processes earlier this year.
Does anyone else have questions before I bring mine in? I can't see any. So I had a question about, well, I had a question about negative discontinuance, but in particular, just building on what you just said about the kind of hang-ups, basically. Do you have any sense of how many of those people hanging up are either repeat calls, or that they are calling back because actually they haven't had a response to something that they'd already called about? So the kind of communication loop failing, if you like. So just whether there's any intelligence about, I mean, I specifically say that because I have done that myself. So I have called 101, I've reported something, I've been expecting a call back to follow up on something, it's not happened. So kind of 2 hours later, I ring back. So it's whether or not there's a kind of, feedback issue with some of that potentially. Oh, just in your 110 comms officers that you mentioned, is that,
Yeah.
are they officers who sit across 999 and 101, or do they specifically sit in one call centre or another?
It depends on the level of training.
Right.
So it depends on the skills and those skills to be able to take a 9 call and then record the information, because they can be different. And we also, without too complicated too much, we also have the capability to put some 99 calls through to what we call dispatch. So that's the desk that sends police officers to jobs, and police PCFOs and colleagues outside. So it depends on the skill set in the room. So if I come back to your point, yes, we do have repeat callers. We're doing some work at the moment to establish the proportion of repeat callers. We know that some of that is people ringing for the second or third time. We also know we can improve the way that we update victims of crime. And we're looking at a specific system at the moment to be able to do that. So people aren't, some of it's about managing expectation. Some of it is about being clear when we're going to bring people back and for what reason. And some of it's about potentially finding different ways of doing it. So if we can communicate with people on email, all the better. They get information in a way that suits them. But we need to improve that. Some of the work we did does demonstrate repeat call 101 into 999. So you can see that people will do that, which is why we need to get 101 performance at the level that are described in this pack, or encourage people to use different ways like online chat, which we're bringing online, which is a different way and really good for the public, because people in the room can manage different conversations multiply at one time. It's much more efficient. So yeah, there's much more work to do in there, Joe, particularly around victim update and making sure we do what we say we're going to do when we're going to do it.
Perfect. Yeah. I mean, and just from me to the 110 comms officers, just to ensure that they are properly, just from our point of view, thanked for all the work that they're doing. You know, the public do rely on them, and we do really appreciate it. It's clearly a really stressful place to work.
Yeah.
And it's an incredibly important job. So please pass on our thanks to them for all the hard work that they're doing serving the public, which is, we know, not always easy, but is nevertheless really important and really appreciated. We should move on.
Thank you. Okay, so the next slide. So we've covered 2 slides on how quickly we answer emergency calls. We've then covered a slide on how quickly we manage non-emergency. So the next question is, so what do we do then? So this is a slide that describes how quickly operational police officers and PCSOs or others will arrive at emergency incidents, priority incidents, and I'll describe that now. So the top black line you see relates to immediate urban. So we have 2 different measures within North Yorkshire because of the nature of the geography. We have an urban performance, and they're nationally agreed in terms of what qualifies as an urban area and a rural area. We have urban performance, which we aim to deliver within 15 minutes, having received the call. This isn't 15 minutes from when the officer has been asked to attend. This is 15 minutes from when that initial clock starts and we start talking to a person in need. The green line is immediate rural. And I'll come on to that in a moment, because you can see the significant improvement in that. And that has been a conscious investment and realignment of resources to our rural communities. The red line is priority performance. That's within an hour. So the immediate ones will have to meet a certain criteria. We use a model called Thrive, which is threat, harm, investigation, vulnerability. We make that assessment as soon as we receive the call. It goes back to your point about the really tough work that people do in the room who receive these calls. Have got to pick out with very distressed people very often how quickly we need to get there. So in short, we've seen an improvement of our immediate urban response to 87%. We've seen a real improvement in our rural response, as you can see now, becoming more consistent. One of the key reasons for realigning resources was to bring the quality of service closer together. And you can clearly see that's happened. And that's come around, for example, by deploying a resource consistently from Kirby Moorside, because that was an area we couldn't get to. It's about realigning numbers on teams in areas of the force and really understanding your demand. And that's the work that was done last year. The priority performance is still improving. And if I looked at this financial year, we're touching 80% since April, which I'm really pleased about, particularly as we're going through a really busy time of year. And both of the others are remaining above 80%, which is our target. A lot of forces around the country will be very envious of that level of performance, particularly at the moment. So I think that's really worth noting. Graph, you'll see all this tells you is the key areas of the force, which won't be a surprise in terms of demand: Scarborough, York and Harrogate, but also the fact that you might be in Craven or Hamilton. It doesn't mean you don't need an emergency response to Bentham or to Ingleton. And that's one of the challenges of the force, is to make sure that we're able to deliver that service. And in the bottom columns, you'll just see there just a description of some types of incidents. ASB crime, public safety and welfare is what PSW stands for. That's where someone's concerned about someone in general. And the average number of officers that will attend to those type of incidents. Most officers, because of the student cohort we've got, are double crewed. In other words, they're being tutored while they're out on the street. Where we can, we will single crew during the day, and you will see single crewed officers. But we have a high level of student tutoring taking place at the moment, which is mean the double crewed.
Okay, great. Does anyone else have any questions on this slide? I just one kind of thing that would be useful just to have on this slide for clarification. When I looked at them, the population areas, it's quite hard to understand. I can see the absolute numbers of immediate and priority incidents, but what I can't see is how that compares to the population as a whole in those areas. So it would be just useful to see, you know, whether, because that gives us a sense of how much crime is going on in those areas relative to the population. And then my other question was just kind of to just get a sense of the kinds of crimes and offences that are warranting either a priority or an immediate response, because you've got the types there, but obviously they're the same: ASB, crime, and public safety and welfare. What would constitute one thing over another?
It depends. So there are a lot of different reasons why we would deem something an immediate response or a priority, and it's not necessarily crime type orientated. So there are examples where you could have the same crime type that was being reported to us. Let's use a burglary, for example. If someone's reporting a burglary now and they've got people in the house, we'll go now, because we ought to go now to protect them, the family, and to make sure we arrest the offenders. If they've come back from holiday and they've been on holiday for 2 weeks and report a burglary, that's where we would aim to get to them within an hour, because it's not ongoing now. There isn't a requirement. We'll give crime prevention advice and forensic preservation advice over the phone, but there's no requirement for us to be there. There's no offenders there. There's no present risk to the occupant, and therefore we get there in an hour. So it very much depends on the vulnerability of the caller. What do they find themselves in, a vulnerable position or vulnerable circumstances, and the risk of the incident itself. Okay,
no, that's great. We can move on.
Okay. So this slide now starts describing crime levels. So you can see the top graph there. Basically, month by month demonstrates the level of crime that we're recording. Been quite a strange period, really, the last couple of years in terms of baselining due to COVID. Things changed quite a bit out of COVID, societal changes and all the rest of it, but we are through that now. So you can see where our crime levels are. That's a fairly healthy picture, it looks. If you look in the bottom left 3 boxes, this is really important to note. So crime data integrity is our internal auditing of how well we record crime. In other words, when somebody reports something to us, how well we use that information, how we assess it, and how then that results in the right number of crimes and the right type of crimes being recorded. So we could have one incident and multiple crimes. These assessments are from the latest HMIC report. So 93.9% of all reported crimes reported, that's 0.1% of being outstanding. So that's a high end of good. 95% of all violent crimes are recorded, and that's outstanding, and 96.2% of all sexual, that's outstanding in their eyes. So this is about people having confidence that when the Ring North Yorkshire Police report of a crime, we report it. Otherwise, your data is meaningless in terms of how you're reporting your crime levels. So that's that. You can see the box on the right-hand side of the slide, and you'll see a North Yorkshire comparison with the national. In general, we're a safe county, very safe county compared to some, but there are some exceptions in there. Bicycle theft, and I had this question on the last one. That tends to be focused in York, and I think the Tour de Yorkshire in many respects had an impact on this with the number of cyclists we have in the county. I can say that being one. The number of bikes we've got, how we secure them properly, the number that are stolen potentially during burglaries because they're high value. So bicycle theft's an outline. We do have plans around that, but across the rest of the offence types, you'll see, without exception, we compare favourably with the national average. That does not mean we take that for granted in any way. We need to be outstanding in how we investigate crime, and 0 is the right number in NYP crime per 1,000 population. We need to be outstanding and make sure we're doing everything we can to tackle, prevent it, and have the lowest crime rate possible. So that's all I was going to say on that slide, Joe.
Great. Did anyone else have any? Did anyone have any questions on that slide? Yes. I think Simon, you're first, and then Jenny.
Thank you, Joe. So it's just not so much a question, just a comment, really, and it's in relation to crime data integrity. I mean, it may not be sort of obvious in this slide, but I'm sure that it's important to acknowledge that this is an area where the force has had a journey of really significant improvement, and that's important to acknowledge. Even though, as I'm sure Scott's just said in relation to crime overall, the target is always to get things absolutely right. But there was a time at which this was not such an area of strength for North Yorkshire Police not so long ago. So it's worthwhile just making that point. I hope you'd agree, Joe.
Definitely, and very good to know. Jenny, did you want to come in?
Thank you. I was just going to ask Scott if there was anything you wanted to say about the fraud figures in terms of the rate per 1,000 of population, just the difference between North Yorkshire and the kind of the England and Wales standard.
Yeah, I think some of that's to do with how things are reported into action fraud, how they're dealt with nationally. We know that not all frauds are perpetrated in North Yorkshire, and it's how they're recorded. City of London tend to be the clearinghouse for, if you like, the single agency around action fraud. And so something's committed externally or internationally, how that then's recorded is important. But I think we always need to be vigilant around fraud, particularly with our population. So making sure we're working with our partners preventatively to ensure people as protected as they can be. We do have an older population here in the county comparatively, and that's not to say that people are automatically more vulnerable to fraud, but we know that it can be perpetrated against more elderly people, and we need to be vigilant around that, and we do focus on that in terms of our crime prevention, working with our partners.
Thank you.
Thanks. I've got a couple of questions. One also relates to fraud, actually, but also when I looked at it, possibly also theft offences. Just how those things compare to the National Crime Survey, and whether any of this data points to any underreporting, potentially to the police versus, the kind of test level of the crime survey. And my second one was just where does domestic abuse fit on that, in that list, and how do we compare on that? And just on bicycle theft, yeah, I mean, obviously it is a particular York issue. I just wondered what the police were doing, either in terms of the things that we might be able to do with the new mayoral combined authority, or with places like York Bid, who obviously operate in the centre of the city, whether there are conversations already going on about how to try and kind of minimise thefts, at least in the city centre. And I look forward to kind of, working out what else we can do in terms of those kind of, high value cycle thefts that I know are happening in some residential areas as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's some lessons internationally there. When I've personally speaking, travelled and cycled, and you can see that countries perhaps have got a greater experience of cycling, have kind of learnt these lessons, really, Belgium and others, particularly in urban areas, about how they secure bikes, because it's a way of life for getting around. And I think York lends itself to that, doesn't it? Because of the nature. It's very busy in a car. It's relatively flat. It's really made for it. So I think, yeah, we'd look forward to working with the combined authority on that, and colleagues in York. I think there's some really innovative things we could think about doing. We do a lot of aftermarket research around bicycle theft. So, a lot of these go through second-hand markets. Most proper cyclists will be very circumspect about what they buy and where they buy it from. So we need to be really clear about how we're shutting down that second-hand market as well. And then there's just the vigilance of bike owners, really, we need to appeal to, about trying to secure them as well as possible, to frustrate would-be thieves from taking them. But there's no ways about it. On some of the high-value ones, people are determined because of the nature of what they can get back from them. So, yeah. In terms of domestic abuse, Jo, you mentioned there.
Yeah.
You'll know domestic abuse itself isn't a crime type, but within that umbrella, there could be multiple crime types: violent crime, theft, sexual abuse, violence against a person. So we do report separately on domestic abuse crimes, and I've got that data right in front of me. If that's something you wanted to include in here as a specific thematic, then we could do that.
I think it would be useful, because I think it is probably one of the areas where actually it's one of those crime types that doesn't follow geography in the same way as, we do perform extremely well in lots and lots of areas, but actually domestic abuse doesn't follow the same patterns as other crime types, and so therefore I think it is probably useful to include, if that's possible.
Absolutely.
And just anything else you had to say about comparisons with the National Crime Survey?
I think it's always challenging to make sure that people have the confidence to report what you want them to. We can only respond appropriately if we know about something, and it feeds into our intelligence analysis. It means we've got a much better picture about what's happening where and when, and it could be that one or two reports that make the difference in terms of identifying offenders and arresting them. So I think what the crime survey will tell you, confidence in reporting crime more generally, there's a sense that crime is generally underreported. We're not immune to that. I think it would be foolish to say every crime that happens in North Yorkshire reported to us. It's about securing the confidence of the public, that they know that we want to understand what's happening. We will investigate proportionately with lines of inquiry, reasonable lines of inquiry. But if we don't know about it, we can't see the full picture. And as I've said, it might be that one report that really helps us.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, thank you. I think we can move on.
Okay, so this is a more specific look at certain crime types. So the first one's burglary residential. I think we've already had the discussion. This has been a challenge for us in the early part of the year. We are starting now to see an alignment with the levels of reporting from last year. We're reporting slightly over in our burglaries this year. The nature of this level of crime in North Yorkshire is what one victim is too many. But you've seen from the previous slide, we don't have the numbers that other forces do, thankfully. We really focus on burglary of people's houses as well as business burglary. This is a full basket. residential there, you'll see this is the houses and outbuildings. So this also includes sheds and garages. It's not just people's dwellings. We have 3 specific operations at the moment for each command. We've got Op Respond in Harrogate, we've got Op Pearl in Selby, and we've got Op Stack in York. The nature of that offending is cross-border in some respect. We have Cleveland to the north, West Yorkshire to the west, a bit of South Yorkshire to the south, Humberside, and we have some very nice areas on the edge of our county. So there is a cross-border issue that we use our roads policing resources. We work closely with the forces to tackle that. We recently took out a team from West Yorkshire, prolific organised crime around 2-in-1, what we call 2-in-1 burglaries, or where basically they break into the house to steal the keys for the car, or they use transmitters to open the car with keyless theft now, which we also see. So we understand the nature of the problem. There's some real focus in our commands on offenders, and we're just seeing a good uptick in our detection rates compared to last year. But that takes time to feed through to the reduction, because it's about taking people off the street and into custody where they ought to be once we've charged them. So that's burglary. Robbery, you can see relatively small numbers. Small numbers of these offences are alarming, which they are. So, for example, recently a shopkeeper held up with a knife for money, obviously through of the business. But there is also a proportion of these which are young people, either for a mobile phone or a bicycle. So it's really important. They're absolutely robberies. They meet the definition of a robbery, but there is a wide scale of risk and worry to communities about the nature of these offences. We have a fairly healthy detection rate on robbery too. So where we get one reported, we do properly focus on the investigation, and usually these will be investigated by CID and detectives. If we move to violent crime, you can see a downturn there. We're seeing a reduction in violent crime in all categories this year. That includes serious violence, which is very pleasing. A lot of proactive work with partners in our urban centres, the serious violence duty, the way that we're coordinating with partners around that, and also a lot of the intervention we have with young people, which I'll come on to later, in terms of the projects we have there to prevent them from becoming victims around knife crime. And then vehicle crime is also seeing a reduction. We knew we had a problem with that earlier in the year, as you can see. We managed to get back on top of that, and it's just about retaining that focus on offenders and prevention messages in particular.
Great, thank you. Does anyone have any questions on that? I don't actually think I do on that one.
Okay.
Can move on to the next one.
Okay, so this is, I'll explain the meaning of CROMU. Police are great at acronyms. So this is essentially our unit, our crime records management unit. So this, put very simply, is member of the public rings the force, we record a crime, that will then get allocated out for investigation. Sorry, can you go back, Mick, one? Just onto the CROMU. All right, okay. There you go. So this is how we manage our crime records. Now, last year we had nearly 18,000 crime records waiting to be finalised. You can see the significant focus on reducing that. This has all kinds of implications, both for reporting our criminal justice performance in terms of how long trials take, and what our detection rate is for the force as well. We're currently sat at 2,700 as of this morning. That's a vast improvement. We want to be lower than that, and we've commissioned a piece of work earlier this year that's got 40 recommendations for how we can improve process and productivity in there to try and ensure we're about 1,000. So, and you'll always have some that are waiting outcome and finalisation, but it's just to make sure that it's a manageable number. But that's far better than it used to be. What that does in terms of finalising crime outcomes in the way the Home Office expects us to, there's a lot of complex rules around this, that then informs your detection rate. So how many crimes you're detecting. You can see from the bottom graph, our current detection rate on a rolling basis, this was June, it's actually a bit higher than that at the moment, is 17.5%. The national is about 12. Our ambition is to be the best in the country at crime outcomes. We're doing a lot of input to the workforce at the moment around upskilling. If you go back to burglary, we have the highest crime scene attendance rate in the region and the highest yield for forensic evidence. So across a number of different crime investigative measures, we're strengthening and we'll continue to do that.
Great. Does anyone have any questions on that one? Simon.
Joe, thank you. Sorry, and I know you want to make progress, but it's just to acknowledge that there's been quite a lot of attention to this, hasn't there, recently, in terms of the media and public policy. I'm talking about the positive outcome rate, and whilst yes, it is important to emphasise where we rate in comparison to policing generally, it always strikes me with these figures that the public will think that positive outcome rates are remarkably low, even if they're good by comparison to policing in general. So I wondered, Scott, whether, with your permission, Joe, whether Scott might just say a few words about that to the public.
That's a really helpful question. Thanks.
Yeah, I don't think, as much as hard work we've done, I don't think you can celebrate the numbers on there. I think the public would be surprised that there are crimes you can't detect. If there are no witnesses and no evidence, they're nigh and impossible to detect. That's the truth. But there are also a number of others that you can. And it's about us being satisfied that those reasonable lines of inquiry are followed in a timely way, that victims of crime have confidence that that's the service that they are receiving and they're getting those regular updates and it's dealt with properly. I think the majority of people want to see a positive outcome on a crime they report. Of course they do. But I also think the majority know, in the circumstances in which it's committed, when there are no lines of inquiry and we can't detect it, that they accept that and they're pragmatic. But it is really important that where we have got those lines of inquiry, that we professionally follow them.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And look, it is something that even if we are, as Simon says, performing better than some other police force areas, that doesn't mean that, you know, we shouldn't. Yeah, there's still a long way to go, isn't there?
Yeah, we know from our own focus on performance we can improve. But we have made, I think it's really important to know, we have made significant strides. Our outcome rate is up 6% this year. Now, if that continues, we will start getting into the territory of being outstanding, which is where we want to be. So we're doing the right things to improve this. Upskilling of the workforce has been incredibly important, making sure you enable capacity for your frontline officers to be able to investigate crime properly. One of the challenges we've got, as is nationally, is a shortage of detectives, and we know that that's still evident, and that does have an implication in this area.
Okay. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, so this is a slide on the stop and search. I mean, it's fairly self-explanatory. There are some kind of exceptions on here might be of interest. I did mention this one last time because this is a wide range of data for over a year, but you've got a search of a 10 and under person, 10 years old and under in the bottom graph, which you can see. That was as a result of the report from the family that they believed they were carrying a knife. We've got responsibilities to safeguard young people, and we'll do that professionally. So that was that exception there. But I'm happy to take any questions on this one, Joe. There's quite a lot of data and numbers on here. If there's anything that comes out, then I'm happy to take questions.
Yeah, I've definitely got a couple of questions, but did anyone else have anything before I do my my bits? No, I can't see any hands. So my question, I had a question about, you're right, there's quite a lot on there, isn't there? The age groups being searched, and particularly the under 18s, and just some reassurance around parental presence and notification around that, and whether it's possible to get a gender breakdown of the under 18s in particular. and also what your grounds would be for the under 18s. You mentioned one of the under 10s, but those numbers strike me as quite high. Those numbers of under 18s being searched. So just anything else you can add on that, and also just anything you can say about the ethnicity breakdown, and how we compare again to some other areas. Yeah.
Okay, so so in terms of the age group, so the grounds are the same whether you are under 10 or 50. In terms of the powers you can use, there's no different. So there are certain items you can search for using a legitimate stop search powers, and I should say they are legitimate. When I mean the powers are legitimate in what it's focused on, which is prohibited articles that people might carry. That could include stolen property, weapons, knives, bladed articles, pointed articles. Drugs is another one. So they are specifically designed to focus on recovering evidence, obviously, of criminal offences that people have on the person. You have to have reasonable grounds to be able to use that search, and you have to record it. And we've done a lot of work over the past 18 months or 2 years to improve our recording and our systems of recording on mobile devices and other things. One of the things we've done is removed something called stop an account. So where we would stop and speak to somebody, we've kept stop and search on there, and that change actually explains, you can see in the bottom left hand corner, no outcome recorded, that they were in the main attached to stop an account records, where you wouldn't necessarily, there was no way of putting an outcome record on a stop an account, which is why we've moved to stop and search. We have a lot of external scrutiny on this, stop search scrutiny panels, so that people can dip sample at random stop searches. They can look at the grounds, they can look at the outcomes, they look at how it was conducted. You'll see from the data the vast majority conducted on males, so that tends to be the focus. And you can also see that around 20% lead to an arrest, which is there or thereabouts in line with national averages in terms of a success rate, if you like, of finding the evidence that you're looking for. But you're right, in terms of young people, we do apply scrutiny to that. Every stop search goes through a supervisor, has to be signed off and approved. Those grounds are checked. They're checked internally through our stop and search and use of powers board, and we then share that externally in terms of scrutiny.
And so actually there's no different grounds for the under 18s, but are there any different processes? So you just said about having to get it signed off, but in terms of the young person themselves?
No, there doesn't have to be someone else there with them. If they're out on the street and you're looking for that kind of material, there doesn't have to be an adult there. That I should say, these are all captured on body-worn video. Yeah. So you've got a body-worn video account, it's captured there, but you wouldn't wait for an adult to attend because of the nature of what you're looking for, and that might not be feasible.
Okay. Okay.
These are stop searches on the street, not some of the custody-based processes, which are entirely different.
And I would still be quite interested in those under 18s, the gender breakdown. I appreciate that the numbers are small, but I would be particularly probably more concerned about if officers of one gender are searching, are stopping and searching young people who are a different gender. I just think there's I just quite like to understand that, if that's possible.
Yeah, we can provide that.
Great. All right. Did anyone else have anything on that one? No, right, we can move on.
Okay, this slide is quite a bit out of date because of the data. It's worth including, but you'll notice from the bottom that this is data from June 2023, so it's about a year old. And because of this is a national survey, crime survey of England and Wales, so it's not something North Yorkshire do or the mayoral office do. But we do think, it's worth including. But at that time, if you looked a year ago, the rank of North Yorkshire Police is in the top quartile for offences nationally. If you go to the end column, So that's community understanding, confidence, fair treatment, police deal with community priorities. You'll see in the last column what North Yorkshire Police's rolling total is, if you like, and then you'll see the England and Wales average. We'd always want to be better. I think you ought to be better, particularly around community understanding, neighbourhood policing, because that allows you to solve crime, reduce antisocial behaviour and keep people safe. But I just think it's worth keeping in here, and it is due a refresh in terms of that. But there are some positive results for the force in there compared to the national picture.
And what would you say our next steps on some of this should be?
So I think if we were thinking about, and the chief obviously has made a significant commitment to strengthening neighbourhood policing, absolutely, particularly around tackling crime and offenders and dealing with local priorities. I think some of the fuel of neighbourhood policing is getting that local confidence measure. So how do localised communities feel? Because this is at a national level. What are the key priorities within those local communities? And surveying communities to really understand that. Because what that starts doing is creating that you said we did confidence cycle. And it's formalising that engagement with the police to say, this is what really matters to us this month. Here's your identified local priorities. This is a crime. And it allows us to feed back and really understand the impact of policing and partnerships in terms of dealing with that. So it's something I know Simon's got his hand up, we've discussed before. It's that how we can put that surveying in place locally to really start the fuel of neighbourhood policing and that local delivery.
Simon, do you want to come in?
I do. Thanks, Joan. It really just sort of complements what Scott has just said. But I think it's a question that you could legitimately put to me and to the senior team in the office as well, because knowing how important this is to you and to Mayor Scaife, and for that matter for the Home Secretary, we probably will need to do something a little different in coordination with the force, not just in terms of lining up our community engagement activities, but also ensuring we really do understand to a high level of detail and sophistication what the public are telling us about their confidence in North Yorkshire Police and why that might be characterised in that way and what the reasons might be. So I think subject to your direction about how much of a priority you want to make that in future police and crime plan, then we will be ready to make sure that we are working with the force to do even more in this space than we have done in recent years.
Great. Good. Okay, we can move on to the next one, I think.
Okay. Thanks, Mick. So this describes the shape of those who work in North Yorkshire Police, if you like, in the key headings. So PCS sales are budget for 163. We're currently, our actuals are about 138. Even at 138, this compares incredibly favourably with our most similar forces around the country. However, you'll know that we are looking at neighbourhood policing at the moment. We're looking at what that correct balance and blend of resources needs to be. And we're really keen, and we're doing it over the summer, to understand from the public what really matters to them, because the balance of powers between police officers and PCSOs is key, depending on the priorities and the problems we face. One is much more enforcement, if you like, proactive crime fighting, use of orders related, and the other one tends to be more visibility, community engagement. There's no reason why, and those things have to work together. But the Chief and I are very keen to establish what the correct balance is to deliver the best for our communities at the moment. Police officers, you'll see there, the Police Uplift Programme will be familiar. Our funding is directly tied to us at the moment, certainly, still retaining the numbers that were set for us in the Police Uplift Programme. If we don't, then we lose funding. So 1665 is our baseline of police officers. The actual head count's about 1673 with part-time and a few other elements in there. and we're achieving that at the moment to make sure we secure that funding going forward. But we'll watch and see what happens with that. And then our police staff colleagues, who are fundamental to delivering policing and supporting operational colleagues, if you like, 1,305 police staff, a really strong and dedicated cohort of special constables who are fantastic in supporting roads policing in neighbourhoods and other functions across the force. And again, a fantastic cohort of volunteers who do so much to support North Yorkshire Police in what they try and do to keep communities safe. If you then go on to the diversity, you can see a description of the diversity within a workforce we've got. We've got work to do. We've got work to do on gender, and we've got work to do on race. And we probably haven't got time to talk about it now, but the work we're doing around the police race action plan and inclusion and positive action, I think, is something that we'll talk about in future months.
Yeah, great. Does anyone have any questions on that slide? It would be just useful from my point of view to understand what the operational effectiveness is of this particular balance, because obviously, you know, these are all, you know, we've got a balance of police officers, special staff and PCSOs. What kind of is that balance, do you think, right? Or do you think we should be doing, you know, what kind of shift in balance might need to happen to shift police officers, for example, or police officers and PCSOs onto the front line?
Yeah, I think that's worth a discussion probably once we've done the work over the summer. So once we understand the demands and the needs and the requirement, then that helps you inform what your resourcing balance needs to look like. Of course, we've been pretty much constrained is the wrong word, but the number of police officers we have, we can do work internally, but ultimately the work you do to grow your police officer numbers is at the cost of something else, inevitably. Other than the police uplift programme that we've got at the moment. We've done a lot of work recently, and the Chief and I are pretty much satisfied. The operating model that we've got is not far off what we need for the force, but we do need to invest more around neighbourhood policing. And I know there's a shared ambition to do that, but it's working out what level of resource. And the other element of that we shouldn't overlook is the current public safety service that we collaborate with Fire on, because there's academic research that's significant to tell you that service is really successful, particularly in rural communities. And I see the public safety service being complementary to neighbourhoods, particularly in the more rural areas of the force. So there's a bigger question about collaboration, public safety service, and what we actually want our neighbourhood policing teams to be really focused on.
Yeah, absolutely. And the other thing I picked up around the police safety, as well as the kind of effectiveness in some of the more rural communities, was also just around some of that right care, right person collaboration, potentially with other blue light services. You know, we know that we're getting additional demand coming through around mental health, for example. You know, what role, you know, alternative ways of thinking about some of this stuff could have in helping with some of that going forward is all would all be really useful. And yes, I know that we're having ongoing conversations about the police race action plan, and certainly I appreciate what you're saying, that there is still work to do. So I look forward to having more conversations with you about that. I think, has anyone else got anything on that particular slide, or shall we move on? I think we can move on.
Okay, this is really, without going into too much detail, this is a finer detail breakdown of your headcount and establishment for police officers throughout the year. This is really the reassurance that we're recruiting at the right rate to the right level to ensure that we don't lose funding. So that's what that tells you there. And then you can see the projections around PCSOs for the rest of the year. But I won't go into any more detail on that, if that's okay. That just gives you that level of reassurance.
Yeah, no, I didn't have any questions on that one. Did anyone else have anything on that? No, great.
And then the final slide on force performance relates to sickness and absence. So The top graph in particular demonstrates how much is physical sickness, how much is psychological. In truth, I think it's fairly difficult sometimes to differentiate the two. What one can lead to the other. And we do know we have a growing number of people who are suffering stress, psychological trauma, because of what they're dealing with and the intensity of what they're dealing with. And sometimes that can manifest itself in physical symptoms. So that's basically a picture from how we pick up from our sickness recording, but we always have one eye on the underlying trends and reasons for that. Moving to the table on the top right, you can see there the most common reason at the moment for sickness absence is cold and flu. Again, how do you differentiate that from the uptick in coronavirus that we're seeing? Because we are nationally, and certainly I've spoken to more people in the last 2 months or so who seem to be testing and contracting it than I have done for a while. And I think that's been reported nationally as well and through health colleagues. And then at the bottom shows you the rolling count of sickness month by month. We've actually seen a slight reduction in July so far. But again, if you look at the top table compared with the bottom, you can see the overriding reason when you add them together is 45% there or thereabouts is cold and coronavirus. So about 3.4% of available hours lost through sickness. That compares favourably again with regional forces, but we have been lower than that, and we need to keep focusing on making sure our workforce are supported, they've got access to wellbeing and welfare where we can, that they feel as though the organisation is providing for them in a way that's meaningful to make sure that public money essentially is used the best we can and we're as effective and efficient. So that remains a key focus. That's picked up through monthly performance reviews with every area of business in the force, and senior leaders are held to account for how they are supporting their own people and returning them to the work appropriately.
Thank you. Does anyone, I've got a couple of questions on this one. Does anyone have anything before I jump in? No, not seeing any yellow hands. So just one was just whether those sickness rates, there was any differential between officers, PCSOs and staff. Not because it particularly matters, but it was more that to understand whether or not there might be something else sitting behind it in terms of the kind of stress that people are potentially dealing with day to day. And the other question I had, which isn't captured there, and it may therefore not be an issue, is just whether there's any intelligence about staff absence that might be caused by waiting for NHS treatments. We know that we've got, huge backlogs in all kinds of areas, and just whether or not that is potentially impacting on our staff. And then also just whether there's anything either from our office point of view or just within HR for the police, just to ensure that people are kind of, we recognise the work that they're doing and that they realise how appreciated and valued they are as kind of, public servants who are out there keeping us safe. So just wanted to put those two things on the record. And I don't think this is, it's obviously concerning, but equally, it's been a really difficult time for people, and there is a lot, as you said, going on, and I don't know how we can see how it compares in this year. I guess I'd be interested in how we're comparing in a pre-COVID way.
Yeah, I think we can draw that data down. No, but we can pick these up outside as well, outside of the meeting, and kind of reshape the pack. That won't be a problem. NHS, yeah, we see it, and particularly where there's primary care responsibilities, but then moving on to longer term mental health provision, musculoskeletal physiotherapy, there are significant delays. We know why, but it does have an impact on it, to the point actually where we are seeing applications for support to go private. Some of the issue around that is cost, clearly, and some of it actually some of the reasons why the NHS might not be able to treat people are exactly the same that private might not be able to. But that lag in being able to access services, you definitely do see on some of the sickness cases, particularly mental health.
Yeah, and I think it's one of those things that I think it's really difficult for, members of the public. It's really frustrating, but equally it kind of shows how these services fit together, and how if we've got one area of public service that desperately needs support, how it interlaces with other public services. Yeah, so anyway, look, it's really helpful. It would be useful to see how we're doing compared to before COVID, but we can take that up separately.
Yeah, no problem.
And I think is that the last one on this one?
That's fast. Yeah.
Great. Thank you so much for that. I think we can move straight on to the thematic topic presentation around hidden harms, and I think is it Detective Superintendent Graham Wright is going to take us through these slides. Is that right?
It is, yes. Thank you.
Brilliant.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Graham Wright. I am the Detective Superintendent for the Safeguarding Command. Just for a little bit of very brief context, essentially two main elements to the work of the Safeguarding Command. There's a number of operational teams, such as the Missing and Exploitation team, the MASH Domestic Abuse team, online child abuse investigation and offender management. And then I also have responsibility for delivering the force response for rape and sexual offending, child sexual abuse, exploitation, domestic abuse, stalking, modern slavery, organised immigration crime and violence against women and girls. And I've been asked to provide a bit of an overview discussion around what's been termed hidden crime. What my intention is to try and give a bit of a flavour, because these are all really significant subject areas, both in terms of the causes, impact on victims and how we respond. But we'll talk today around modern slavery, human trafficking, a little bit about online child abuse, honour-based abuse, domestic abuse and hate crime. And what I'll aim to do is give you a bit of a flavour of what's working well, some of the things that we are struggling with, the plans we have in place to improvement, and how we will measure that success. I think it's also useful, just as a very brief general overview as well, before we delve into some of the detail on each type, that it's important to understand why these crime types are hidden. There are obvious benefits to an offender to try and hide their criminality in all crime types, of course. But what's typified across all five of these, I would suggest, are some really specific issues, particularly around the vulnerability of the victims involved in these cases. There is very often as well a strong element of control, whether that's through deception, coercion, manipulation, threat, or use of violence to intimidate victims. And I think from a policing point of view, there's a real challenge, I think, that we have been wrestling with, not just here in North Yorkshire, but nationally, is that I think to try and understand victim behaviour much better, to be much more understanding of the impact of trauma and how people react to offending in the way that they do, and making sure that we are taking all opportunities to be able to gather evidence in a way that is bespoke and focused and centred around providing the best service to that victim, as opposed to a sort of generic crime response, which we might see elsewhere. So if we could... just before you move on to the next slide, I think it would just be useful to understand how these types of crime are currently dealt with by the police in terms of specialisms versus the frontline officers that we just talked about in the previous set of slides. So just if there's anything you can just say about how that currently works, given the kind of particular challenges that you just set out. Yeah, of course. So it is different across all of these five areas. And in terms of modern slavery, this will often be investigated in the safeguarding investigation teams in each particular geographical location, albeit we do now and have invested in the last 12 months in a specialist exploitation team which covers both child and adult exploitation, and there's some real specialist knowledge within that team. They manage some investigations directly, the highest harm, highest threat investigations, but also provide tactical advice and support to those detectives working in each district office. In terms of online child abuse, that is almost exclusively now managed within the online child abuse investigation team. Really dedicated team of officers who sit as part of the safeguarding command and manage all of that investigation pretty much from start to finish through that unit. Again, honour-based abuse, similar to modern slavery in a sense, and again, when we get into the detail, it's really small numbers in terms of that one in particular. But again, that investigation will often be led by a detective on command, but with specialist tactical advice from the centralised units. Very similarly with domestic abuse as well, that's much higher volume. There will be both detectives and uniformed officers responding and investigating domestic abuse, depending on the risk and threat level that sits within the particular case. And then hate crime, probably more broad. There's a lot more preventative work, which would be led through neighbourhood teams, and then specialist investigation, depending on the nature of the actual crime that fell out the back of the incident.
Yeah, does anyone have anything on that first slide, or should we move on? We should probably let you make some progress.
Marvellous, thank you. So I think certainly for most of these, apart from honour-based abuse, they actually stray across 2 slides. So it might, whether you want to ask questions as we go or wait till we get to the end of each section.
Why don't you do that? Yeah, do them in the pairs that you've got them in. That would be great.
Okay, so in terms of modern slavery, this is a real challenge. And I think that there is some particular improvement that's been undergone in the last few years, particularly around our knowledge and understanding of what constitutes modern slavery. And I would draw into that issues around human trafficking and organised immigration crime as well, where it's very difficult often to differentiate between the 3 areas. The way that this has been understood nationally, particularly, and the interaction with organised crime abroad has really improved over the last few years, and that is definitely an area across law enforcement where is good news. In terms of the response in North Yorkshire, as I say, we now have a dedicated team who have had some intensive training around managing modern slavery, human trafficking and organised immigration crime. And we've built up a really strong knowledge base amongst that team and amongst the officers working there. Small unit, but very committed, and as managing some really significant investigations that cross across the force area and beyond, and provide a really good conduit into other agencies as well. We work on a number of cases very closely with the Regional Organised Crime Unit and also with the NCA. And those partnerships across law enforcement are really essential in this work. As I said, quite often there is criminality linked to these regionally, nationally, and internationally, which makes solving them as a single police force often impossible. But we've able to really develop those partnerships, and also I think start to look at how we get further support from other agencies within the safeguarding adults partnerships as well. I think there's a growing understanding from many of those partners about the role that they can play, both in terms of understanding, identifying modern slavery, flagging it appropriately, and responding to safeguard individuals as well. The challenges in the same way, whilst we have improved our knowledge and understanding, this is a really fast-paced and rapidly evolving area of criminality. The image on there of people sort of piling in and out the backs of lorries and is probably one that often springs to mind. But we're increasingly seeing a much more nuanced slant to this. The preconceptions, I think, of what some of this type of crime might entail has really changed. And we see particularly issues around the care sector emerging across North Yorkshire and York very recently. Really complex and challenging investigations for us because they encompass both sort of failings within care provision as well as economic offending and modern slavery as well. So trying to unpick who does what with other agencies such as CQC, and making sure that we've got a really strong wraparound for not only the people who are being exploited as part of the slavery, but the knock-on effect on people who they might be working with as well. We see similarly, we've seen offences that are centred around drug supply and cultivation, money laundering, and a strong flavour around sexual abuse through the use of prostitution as well. Again, really challenging things to unpick with victims. There's some real vulnerabilities there. Some cultural issues, I think, around trying to engage with victims in this who may have come from countries where law enforcement agencies don't have the same confidence and reputation as perhaps we might enjoy here. And that diversity and complexity presents us with some real difficulties around trying to support those victims effectively. And then if we just move on to the next slide, please. In terms of our plan to deliver improvement, I mean, without risk of repeating myself throughout this, that there is a really comprehensive plan. We model ourselves along the sort of 4P approach that's been used in counter-terrorism across all of these areas. This is around making sure that we're properly equipped and prepared to respond. We're seeing some real improvements around our training, not only within the specialist team, but how that's then rolled out to the wider workforce and partners. And that's particularly around the ability to be able to identify modern slavery, as I said, in a much more, it's appearing in a much more nuanced way. I think ability to safeguard and prevent offending is a really important one. And there's some really good examples of practice. A good example might be in Scarborough, for example, where we've instigated pieces of work through the Community Safety Partnership to raise awareness amongst people migrating into the area about their rights and entitlements. And those kinds of initiatives at that sort of grassroots level have a huge impact on people who are coming to work in our country, no doubt with legitimate and honest aims, but finding themselves being exploited and abused in the process. And so that those kinds of supportive measures are a really key factor of our plan for delivery. At the other end, it's about relentless pursuit of offenders, about identifying them effectively as organised criminals, making sure they're properly mapped and scored. And we've seen a real upturn in how many organised crime groups we're investigating, particularly in the field of child criminal exploitation. So these are gangs or groups of adults focused largely around drug supply, who in the past we would have investigated as drug dealers, but actually we're taking more of an approach of investigating them as perpetrators of modern slavery, and making sure that there's proper safeguarding in place for those children to reduce their involvement and risk of harm through that type of criminality. In terms of our measures of success, the plan is focused heavily around the identification of offenders and victims. As with all of these, one of the difficulties is around that flow of knowledge and information and intelligence, being able to identify those groups as they arrive either into North Yorkshire or the ones who are here already. The investigation rate and the detection rate of those crime types is really important. And as you'll see from the table at the bottom, we are seeing falling numbers of incidents. The key thing that I want to be able to understand through our intelligence collection is whether that's a true picture of the falling crime. We would hope it would be, or is it that our ability to identify it is becoming obstructed, as I say, as those different types of crimes change. If I pause there on modern slavery.
Yeah, that's great. I'm going to reverse what I did previously. I'm just going to ask my couple of things first, and then if anyone else has got anything, they can jump in. Just one kind of small technical question about the graph. The incident of modern slavery, is that a number of victims, or potentially could one incident, if it was a care home, for example, have a larger number of victims? Or what does an incident mean?
Yes, so the incident count will be the number of incidents. So one incident might have multiple victims.
Right.
Confusingly, that might then yield numerous crimes, because going back to what the Deputy Chief Constable was saying earlier about crime data integrity, we would then potentially have more crimes, because there would be one crime per victim recorded.
Yeah.
But in terms of this graph, this is the overall number of incidents.
Yes, but what I'm saying is potentially it kind of paints a picture of an overall kind of downward trend, but actually you don't really know until you know how many victims you're dealing with how well we're doing, I guess, because you know some of those incidents might be one person and some of them might be 20.
Yeah, agreed. And in that sense, it's potentially necessarily that helpful. We could provide a detailed breakdown of the number of crimes, if that would be helpful.
I mean, I just think it's important, if we're, you know, just to understand the picture that we're looking at, really. The other thing that struck me, well, a couple of things. One, in terms of this kind of crime in particular, was the role for the mayoral combined authority, in particular working with the local authorities around either the kind of standards that they have for the services that they'll be commissioning directly around adult social care, for example, and care homes, where I know there have been some incidents of modern slavery in the past or recent past, and just also, again, because of the nature of this particular type of offence and organised criminal gangs, just what cross-border work we're doing with other forces, just because presumably this stuff is not, it won't be just North Yorkshire, these people will travel.
No, and that's a real challenge. So to answer the first part, I would say, broadly speaking, that these things fall into two areas. So things, for example, such as the care home issues, or maybe crimes that have been identified through housing providers, where you've houses of multiple occupancy that are perhaps being that there are some warning flags there. I would say absolutely, in terms of commissioned services, there is a really strong role to play within that. Some of the other areas, so for example, the sexual harm caused through prostitution, that we get virtually no reports of that. All of our understanding from it is from proactive work that we've had to go out and do, identifying people advertising sexual services online, for example, and then putting in place safeguarding work around the victims. That's where our partnerships across law enforcement come in really to their own, working really closely both with our own and other regional organised crime units and the NCA. Those are very fast-paced OCGs that will flex and move their operations really quickly. So what might suddenly turn up in North Yorkshire this week may well be then in a completely different part of the UK next. The missing and exploitation team have got a really strong process around how they manage those kinds of things and refer them across either to the home force or through the regional networks as well.
Great. Does anyone else have anything on modern slavery they wanted to bring in? Jenny.
I was just going to come in and say, from an exploitation in terms of sex workers perspective, we've got dedicated support at the Women's Centre in York, and we've got an exploitation risk assessment conference that we're working with on partners, including the police. So I just thought it was just important just to reference that, given what Graham's just said.
Great. I think we should probably try and move on, and if I dare suggest, let's try and speed up slightly, if that's possible. Sorry, this is my, I'm trying to balance being thorough with timekeeping, and currently thoroughness is beating timekeeping, so apologies. Would you like to move on to the online child abuse slides?
Okay, of course, yes. So again, a really challenging area to work in. As I said earlier, almost all of the online child abuse is managed through the online child abuse team. And so their capacity to be able to manage this is clearly a key factor for us. Much of our intelligence collection, again, works really closely with law enforcement partners. There's a good deal of this comes from referral through the National Crime Agency and Regional Organised Crime Unit around their proactive work, whether that's undercover online or in terms of information they gather in other ways as well. And that intelligence collection flow and process is really slick now. The team are very victim focused, particularly around making sure where we identify perpetrators around image offences, the research that's conducted on those to see whether they have access to children and making sure that safeguarding is in place is so fast now. It's a particularly effective area of our work. And then the ongoing offender management, how we work, as obviously another part of the safeguarding command. Once people become registered sex offenders, again, there's really strong processes in place, managing our way through from identification of suspect through that criminal justice process, and then making sure that there's robust management of offenders out the other end. The challenges for us really are volume. This is undoubtedly a growth area in law enforcement, and we're seeing really significant increases across the board. There is some real complexity as well around the digital side of things, particularly. So new platforms and forums and ways of disguising your online activity are emerging all the time. So that keeping pace with the technology is a huge challenge. Again, there's a real international angle to some of this as well. But again, we've got some really good examples of working internationally, whether that's across into the US and the FBI. Some really good examples of recent convictions over there, where we've identified people in the US. Slightly challenging in other countries, depending on the law enforcement regime there, but definitely a complexity that we have to wrangle with. And I think from a sort of preventative point of view, a lot of work ongoing at the moment with partners through the Safeguarding Children's Partnership and into education to raise awareness. One of the, I think, big challenges is around what I've described on the slide as supportive parental oversight. It is a massive challenge. Children myself, and I know how difficult it can be. We can't allow children to not be engaging in the online space, clearly, but it's making sure that they're properly equipped and safe in the same way as we would equip and keep safe our children in the physical world. And I think there's a real role for both for partners and potentially through commission services around raising awareness and helping parents to understand how they can keep their children as safe as possible whilst online. Moving on to the next slide, around the plan to keep people safe. It's around making sure that, as said before, when we identify victims, that intervention is really swift. That data wouldn't be measured in the same way because they don't tend to call into the control room or similar. Again, it's most of our victim identification is through our own proactive work, whether ourselves or with other law enforcement agencies. So responding to that call for service is something that doesn't generally appear sort of in the control room stats, but equally is so critical to make sure that they're safeguarded as soon as possible. We're doing a lot of work at the moment around intervening with perpetrators, particularly children and young people who may be displaying harmful sexual behaviours, making sure that they get support and diversion they need to not become the registered sex offenders of the future. And partners have a really important role to play within that, particularly across education and understanding ideas of consent and what happens with image sharing and so on. Really, really interesting area to start getting into, more heavily involved with. Staff well-being is a massive issue in this area. Interestingly, we do have really good rates of attendance and low levels of sickness within the online child abuse world. The team are really highly motivated, really committed to the kind of work that they do. But clearly that they're witnessing and watching child abuse material every day, and making sure that they're properly provided for and cared for is at the heart of our work in supporting that team. And in terms of the success measures for us, it's really around the proactive measurement of intervention, making sure that our disruptions are as quickly, fast as possible, that we're getting hold of children and safeguarding them where they're at risk of harm as quickly as possible. And we are routinely meeting all of the national guidelines around responding to the packages that are sent out to us.
Can I just ask Jenny if she can just come in at this point, because I think we've got some services that we've commissioned in this area, and I just think it would be useful context. I actually don't have any particular questions on this, but I think it would be useful for a public meeting just to set out the services that we've got available.
Yeah, I think I'll just focus on two of the kind of key services in this space, if that's all right, Jo. We've just newly recommissioned our service for young people or young victims of exploitation, be that sexual or criminal. And that service is now with St Giles, and it's called SOS Plus. But it's a prevention early intervention service and a service for victims of crime in terms of cope and recovery. And it's linked really closely with what we call our parent liaison officer service, which is again a service, as you would expect, for parents and guardians of young children who are at risk of or who have experienced exploitation, again, be that criminal or sexual exploitation, to make sure that we can help them support young people moving forward and hopefully support them to be safer in the future. So those are probably the two key ones that I'd reference given the time, but we do have many other commission services that are on the web pages on our website if members of the public wanted to go and look, and I know Simon Jones will put those links into the social media posts.
Great. I think we should probably move on unless anyone else has got any questions on this.
Okay, so just a single slide on unabased abuse. There's no graph because you'll see the numbers recorded are really small for North Yorkshire. So most of our work in this area has been focused around training and building awareness amongst ourselves and other partners to make sure that people are properly equipped to be able to spot the signs of honour-based abuse. We do have some specialist trained officers within the domestic abuse unit who do review and provide advice and support and guidance. And there's some really robust referral pathways that we can use to support victims when they are identified. The few investigations we have had, we've done a lot of audit work around those because it is clearly a high threat area, and we've seen some really good responses, really good practice in respect of those. The big challenge, I think, for us is making sure that what we're seeing and what we think is the current picture is correct. Particularly, I think, as communities in North Yorkshire and York diversify, is making sure that we're alive to the threat that this could increase, and I think as well making sure that we are open to the newest advances in development, particularly through what other forces that experience this much more frequently can offer and support, and working with other agencies to make sure that that's in place. We have embedded honour-based abuse as part of our wider strategy to tackle violence against women and girls, and I'm really content that we've got a robust plan. As I say, it's just making sure that intelligence collection is really effective.
Can I just ask if there's a particular reason why there's no data since October 2023? Is that because there are no cases?
I believe so, yes.
Jenny, did you want to come in?
Yeah, I just wanted to mention, given again what Graham's just said there in terms of our pathways. So we work really closely with an organisation called Halo. It was a by and for specialist organisation in relation to illegal cultural harms, and we do have a dedicated ISVA, so an independent sexual violence advisor within that service that can work with. And Graham mentioned the pathways. Obviously, we've got IDAS as a main provider, but we've also got specialist providers as well.
Great. Thank you, Jenny. I think we can move on to the domestic abuse slides, if that's okay.
Certainly, yes. I think someone stretches over a couple of slides. Just there's obviously a lot more volume of things to think about here. So in terms of what's working well, really good, and we've got the sort of confirmation of the support through some of our survey work, where victims are engaging both with our own domestic abuse team and also through partners such as IDAS. That level of support is really strong, and we've benchmarked ourselves as part of our domestic abuse tactical plan against some other forces, and we're really happy with the level of support that's offered there. We were praised as part of our recent HMIC findings about the use of the domestic violence disclosure scheme, which is often known as Clare's Law. We've seen some real rises in terms of the right to ask referrals as part of that, driven in no small part by IDAS and that partnership, which is proving really effective. And we get good returns within the national guidelines around those disclosures being made. Similarly, in terms of intervention programmes, we support both MARAC and MATAC in North Yorkshire and across York. These are two related but different schemes, which are around trying to tackle domestic abuse in different ways. The MARAC is very much around information sharing across a whole range of partners, including probation, health, police, child protection, housing. The independent domestic abuse advisors are all part of that, and it's around safety planning really for victims. Whereas MATAC, which is around tackling serial perpetrators, where we'll tackle them where we can for domestic abuse related offences, but equally we'll look at their wider criminality and do whatever it is that's necessary to protect their victims from risk of harm. We see good uptake of the domestic violence protection order, both in terms of our success in obtaining those at court and the engagement with officers, and we are seeing increased use of evidence-led prosecution. So this is where a victim of domestic abuse declines to support the investigation, we still arrest and seek charging advice from CPS with a view to prosecuting the offender anyway. And there's still more work to do in that, but we're making some good grounds in respect to that. And a lot of work through the schools team around, again, this is particularly around a thing called Operation Encompass, which is whereby we notify schools of children where there's been a recent domestic abuse incident, and that allows the school to be able to put in place plans to support that child in the aftermath of domestic abuse. Moving on to some of the challenges, we are seeing rates of victim disengagement being high. We are putting some different measures in place at the moment to try and understand that in more detail. At the moment, our recording is very much they engage or they don't. It's not very nuanced, and we've put in place some new categorisation so we can start to try and get a better understanding of why victims are disengaging at the rate that they do. Again, similar to many of these others hidden crime types, that the overall rate of incidents and victims is falling. In some ways, that it's reassuring, and particularly the number of repeat incidents are falling, and we're seeing good conviction rates in those types of cases where you've got high risk repeat perpetrators. So it's reassuring that I say that there's conviction data to support that. But equally, the question that's in my mind is there a closer link to victim disengagement and falling numbers of overall reported cases than we would want. Looking at the wider preventative and reformative programme, I think that's probably a space that we would like to be working more in, particularly around domestic stalking. I think in terms of perpetrator diversion work, there are services available that I don't think yet commissioned within North Yorkshire and York, and that'd be something I'd be really keen to explore. And I think the big intelligence and information gap for us is around the impact on our more diverse and also rural communities. I think some really strong national research around the impact of domestic abuse on rural communities and underreporting, and there's some useful resources we're starting to tap in through things like the National Farmers Union, for example, who are helping to support some of that kind of work as well. And it's looking, I suppose, as well, more broadly through our partnerships at other causational factors. We know that economic hardship could be a particular flashpoint for domestic abuse. And again, it's finding opportunities to be able to flag and refer people through those processes as well. And then just in terms of the plan, which is on the next slide, our tactical delivery plan for domestic abuse is aligned through the 3 pillars of VORG. So it's a really comprehensive plan that we're delivering in a slightly different way to some of the others, which are, as I say, are focused slightly differently. I make no apology for this being so focused on women and girls, because we know from research that this disproportionately affects them as victims and survivors. We're doing a lot of work training-wise around our workforce, particularly to become more trauma-informed in how we respond. And the domestic abuse matters training sees some major improvements before and after the delivery of that training into the service that victims receive. Our review and scrutiny processes really ramped those up over the last 12 months, particularly where cases were not taking further action, and going back and revisiting those cases time and again to make sure that we get the right results. And then, as I said, the wider intelligence collection, we're tapping much more into our partners to be able to identify and flag signs of domestic abuse that we can then proactively go and target as well. And then finally, just our success measures for this area. There's some good bits around victim survey and the feedback and scrutiny we get both from partners and victims as well. Again, we're really leaning into that. At times, prosecution isn't always necessarily the best outcome, but it's making sure that we understand that, and what we are delivering is the best thing to safeguard our victims. That victim engagement is really important, and of course, the detection rate of how many cases and offenders we bring to justice is clearly a really important part of that as well.
Great, thank you. Does anyone have? Oh yeah, Jenny wants to come in. I'll let you come in first, Jenny, and then I've got a few things I wanted to pick up.
Yeah, I just wanted to pick up on what Graham had said about the kind of stalking perpetrator intervention. So we do have a voluntary domestic abuse perpetrator intervention, which can include stalking provision. So we do have that from a voluntary perspective, but you're absolutely right, Graham. We've identified the fact that there are gaps and we are looking to fill those. So we will be looking at bringing forward some proposals as to how we might move forward to fill the gaps in those positions moving forward. So that's good.
Great, thank you. I had a number of questions. One, I mean, look, I think the thing to be clear about, which wasn't in the slides, is that the numbers here are really significant. It's around 8,000 cases of domestic abuse in York and North Yorkshire. I mean, you know, that's a really big number. So let's just let that sink in. That's 8,000, mainly women across York and North Yorkshire who are our victims here. I think there was one thing in particular I wanted to pick up around making sure that we're putting victims and survivors at the heart of how we respond on some of this. It's in the strategy that's how we should be operating, but just whether there's anything you can say around, you know, it's fine to bring it in as a kind of, we'll know when we've succeeded, but kind of we'll only know if we've succeeded if we've kind of woven it in all the way through. And I think that is a challenge for anyone in the criminal justice sector, from policing all the way through, just to kind of realise that the victims need to be at the heart of everything. I wanted to slightly challenge the point around good engagement with schools. I assume that is patchy because our school system is so kind of unregulated. So therefore, you know, what might be working really well with a couple of schools or academy trusts won't necessarily be the case everywhere. And I'm certainly aware of cases where it hasn't been working particularly well. And in particular, the issue that I think is probably quite important to potentially pick up with partners like schools is around the kind of psychology of perpetrators with some of this. particularly when the perpetrator is the other parent, and just to ensure that that is kind of that schools are aware of that factor, and just also on the victim disengagement in the criminal justice process. I assume that some of that is to do with delays in the process itself. So again, I think that's something I would be keen to pick up separately, just with our partners across the criminal justice. I realise that there are huge pressures across the system, but I think if we do have significant victim disengagement, it may well be because people are waiting incredibly long periods of time to see anything that looks like justice, whether that is from decisions to charge or arrest all the way through to a court case and an outcome from that. But I think that is particularly problematic for this particular crime type because of the volumes that we're talking about, and also because most of the victims in terms of the criminal justice process will be the partners, but actually there'll be often children affected who won't necessarily be listed as victims, but someone who might start a criminal justice process aged 8, by the time the criminal justice process finishes, they could be 12, based on the delays that we're probably seeing in the criminal justice process. So I just think we need to kind of understand, from a victim point of view, what impact that is probably having on a kind of, the next generation of children who are experiencing this. And I'm not saying that there's anything we're going to do about it on this call. I'm just saying that if we're going to put victims at the heart of how we respond on this, we've got to be able to think about the children of those victims as well as the victims themselves.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I mean, the numbers are horrifying, and yeah, I think we're talking sort of nationally. I think 1 in 4 women, 1 in 5 children who are either subjected to or witnessing and living with domestic abuse, and it's frankly terrifying. I couldn't agree more. In terms of the victim survivor's voice, that is a core part of the domestic abuse matters training. That is really victim informed and victim designed. And there is lived experience from survivors of domestic abuse that plays a really core part of that training provision, which I think is one of the real reasons why we see such an improvement in the service delivered before and after the delivery of that training. So absolutely. In terms of the school engagement, Op Encompass is of course now mandatory. We were a pilot force. It's now mandatory across all police forces. Just to give you, I suppose, a little reassurance, every domestic abuse incident where there is a child, the school will be notified. As we've increased our staffing into that team, we are now starting to be able to give them much more detail and more context that sits behind that, so that will help inform that. The bit we can't really influence is, I suppose, what the school does with that information. We can try and influence that as best we can, but what I can, as I say, guarantee is that in all cases we deliver that information to the school, and that information is getting increasingly detailed. The victim disengagement, absolutely, is top of my priority around the response to this. We see 2 spikes in terms of the timeliness of the disengagement that we can say. The main spike is immediately, and I suspect, as I say, once we get the data to start to understand this more effectively, I suspect a good number of those victims will have never wanted a criminal justice outcome. That's my hypothesis. We need the data to back that up. But the main spike is immediately or immediately after the incident. There is some evidence of where cases have gone on for a long time. We then see victim disengagement at that point, but that is secondary to that first one. But as I say, hopefully in the coming months, as the new data measures that we have in place start to take effect, we'll really be able to give some detailed breakdown and understanding of what that looks like.
Great. Jenny, did you want to come in?
Yeah, I just wanted to come back in just to say that kind of as a result, obviously, of the changes to the Domestic Abuse Act, it is a requirement of us now to commission services that support all victims of domestic abuse, including children. So we have piloted and now fully commissioned our whole family approach to domestic abuse, which includes supporting victims within domestic abuse households. So it's a really positive development to our co-commissioning approach to domestic abuse services for victims of domestic abuse. So I just thought it was important just to point that out.
Yeah, thanks. I'm just kind of mindful of time still, and I feel like this was such a meaty agenda that was just completely impossible to do in the time that we had available. But anyway, just on the children and the schools issue, I just wonder whether that's something we shouldn't be picking up with safeguarding partners in local authorities, because the nature of schools are that actually engaging with them individually is challenging. And I appreciate that officers are probably doing their best in terms of making sure that schools have been informed, but it may be that from a safeguarding perspective, we need to go at this from a different angle through local authorities and their safeguarding teams. But I'll leave that with the team to pick up separately. Can we just move on to hate crime? And I'm slightly reluctant to go too quickly, but equally it may be something that we should come back to at another point. Oh, the slides have gone. I don't know whether they've gone for everyone or just for me. We should absolutely talk about it now, but I feel like it's probably quite a big topic, and so therefore it may be something that we're going to need to revisit. But let's, if you could just talk through the slides and the things that you had to say for now, because it feels like that's also a growing area that we're going to probably need to revisit anyway. But do you want to just talk through the things you have to say on those slides for now anyway?
Yeah, so I've spoken with the neighbourhood policing support team, because I must confess isn't my sort of area of specialist knowledge, but obviously given it was sort of rolled in with the other crime types, it felt best for me to come and deliver it. So the key areas that we wanted to highlight was just around the hate crime team, that they review, provide advice and support to investigators on all reports of hate crime. I think that is really important because there are a really broad range of crime types that fall within this. That the hate element is obviously an aggravating feature of what could be sort of any crime, really. So trying to understand and draw the nuances and subtleties of that is really critical. A lot of training work has gone in to across frontline to help frontline officers to understand, draw that out, and be able to respond accordingly. And the community champions training, which goes out to a number of organisations working in and amongst communities, is a really important one. This is, I think, about providing visibility for victims or potential victims of hate crime, and making sure that was recognised really broadly across all of the strands of diversity, but also I think around the delivery of awareness raising, of trying to build some community cohesion, knowledge and understanding, which is really important in this space.
David, did you want to come in?
Yeah, sorry.
Oh, not David.
Hey, it's all right. I know it's confusing.
I knew I was going to get caught out by your
no, it's
your
all right.
name.
Sometimes I call people the surname because I read it wrong.
I'm so sorry.
Yeah, I think on this one, and Graham has got an awful lot of knowledge in this space. Just probably worth highlighting, and I don't know whether it will naturally occur to people, but some of the highest repeat victims in the county are police officers. We have members of staff of hate crime that have 8, 9 and 10 crimes committed against them. I just thought it's worth highlighting in terms of that victimology.
Yeah, that's really helpful. I also think that I don't think it was in the King's speech yesterday around misogyny and a hate crime law change. So I don't now know when that's anticipated to happen, but I also think that's going to create a huge shift in kind of reporting around that kind of stuff. Yeah.
I mean, I should point out that that's race hate. that's race hate crime against officers and staff. So repeat victims, you know, that they have the wraparound services, obviously, and we give them a lot of support. And sadly, the vast majority take it as part of the job, which of course it's not. But just worth highlighting, and that includes all the support that we will give to victims who suffer hate crime out in communities. Absolutely, correctly. But it's just worth highlighting, I think, that the repetition against our own people.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think the thing about this area is that the range of victims is vast. And, you know, therefore, I assume for officers, it's quite challenging kind of area for policing because of the range that you'll be dealing with. Does anyone have anything there's another, is there another, have you done both slides?
No, Matt.
No, carry on, sorry.
So yeah, the challenge there's clearly confidence issues, and we know that from the work that the team have undertaken with existing victims who have been identified, that you know that they felt that it was a really difficult thing to report, and I think there was a growing body of evidence academically to support that this is a hugely underreported area of criminality. So that trust and confidence that we need to build is a key challenge for us. And as DCC Bissett mentioned around hate crime, is a real issue amongst police officers. And I think shamefully in the past we have seen them receiving quite a poor level of service as victims of crime. I feel confident that is really improved in recent times, but it's making sure so that they get the service they deserve as well. And then just on the other slide, a little bit around the plan from here. Real investment into the team with dedicated PTSO, doing some specific engagement work. That's all around trying to build that trust and confidence. Clearly, the Police Race Action Plan has a role to play within this as well, I think. In terms of making sure that we're representative of our communities and beyond. The opportunities, I think, for some of our staff support networks to help with some of that is a really exciting opportunity as well. And again, that's something we're trying to cultivate and nurture, and clearly looking at alternative ways of reporting other than ringing or coming into a police station. Is something that we've recognised from other areas as good practice, and that we're seeking to implement now. And similarly to some of the other areas, in terms of our measures of success, it's got to be around victim satisfaction and how we make sure that the service victims receive is of the highest possible standard, understanding where that's not the case and putting in place appropriate changes to improve. And I think is one of those areas where actually an increased reporting actually could potentially be seen as a measure of success. Certainly in the short term, it will allow us to have a much, I think, clearer understanding of the patterns, and I think hopefully an indication of increased confidence and willingness to report. Do our best to field any further questions in this area as well. So that's...
Jenny, you wanted to come in.
Not a question, but just to share kind of information with the public again. So supporting victims team within the office is an independent hate crime reporting facility. So you can report to the supporting victims team. So that's supporting victims in North Yorkshire in terms of a website link. So anybody can go on and report a hate crime independently on there. And it's just also to mention that our restorative justice provider, Restorative Solutions, delivers hate crime awareness courses as part of our out-of-court resolutions as well. So, and they've been really successful in terms of our overall reduction in occurrences as a result of interventions in relation to restorative justice. We've seen a 78% reduction of 12 months pre and 12 months post. So it's been really successful piece of work.
Thank you, Jenny. Did anyone else want to come in? I just had a note about our services in that area, Jenny, so thank you. So you've dealt with that. Yeah. In which case, am I right in thinking, Graham, that that was your last slide?
It was, yes.
Brilliant. Sorry, better late than never. Thank you for that and for all the work that has gone into pulling that together. I think that concludes the agenda item on the spotlight, on the thematic section, and we need to move on to the spotlight section, I think. I don't know whether we don't have slides for the spotlight section, do we? That's just me asking questions, I think. So Simon, you're nodding, can you just clarify that's what I'm supposed to do?
Yeah, that's exactly what you're supposed to do, Jo. Yes, absolutely.
Great. So I've got a few issues I wanted to ask about. I think it might, just in the interest of time, I might ask them all together, if that's okay. And then if officers wanted to, police officers, that is, wanted to come in response, that would be great. So one question was around the football and the Euros and whether that had caused any particular policing challenges in terms of any particular crime types, actually, and anything that you wanted to feedback on that, which obviously finished at the weekend. Then a second question, just anything around police standards that has come up over the period since the last meeting, that you can add for the public. And then the domestic abuse, rural communities, just anything you can say about what has been done around domestic abuse and rural areas, and whether there's anything on the impact that that has been having. Those were my three issues that I wanted to raise. If Scott, you or others wanted to come in on any of that.
Yeah, no problem. I can pick them up. So start with the Euros then. So we anticipate events such as this. They're in the calendar a long way before they're due to take place. Conventional wisdom will tell you that with the nature of the football being played, and this is by no means to stereotype people who watch football by any stretch, but the data tells us that there can be an increase in demand for policing services around the times of the fixtures and then following it. So we had a dedicated operation across the force for each fixture, particularly the ones that were on the weekends, because if you recall, some of them were midweek. The weekends have the potential to be more problematic, obviously, because perhaps the constraints about not going to work the day after aren't quite as obvious as they are when it's a Wednesday, particularly where alcohol is concerned. In general, in terms of public disorder, no strong evidence whatsoever that there was an increase in that. We had an increased presence in our urban centres, particularly for understandable reasons, because that's where most of the licensed premises are. We've worked close with licensing about what we were doing. Local authorities, were they putting big screens up? Most don't now because of the cost to it, isn't it? The security and everything else that comes with it. So we didn't have any of that to contend with. In terms of violence, again, there's a little bit more analysis to be done. But I would say there hasn't really been an obvious trend of increased violence. The concerning one is domestic abuse. So when you look at the fixtures, this is early evidence. We're still doing the analysis of this, and I'll explain why in a moment. When you look at the fixtures that were held on a weekend, so on a Sunday night, there appears to be an exceptionally high level of reporting within the next 24 to 48 hours. So it doesn't necessarily happen Sunday night. You start getting the reports Monday into Tuesday, which is understandable in a way, because people have time to think about it, and then we record crimes as a result of what's been reported to us. And probably deeper than that, if I'm honest with you, and more disturbing, is the two fixtures in particular were the two less favourable results in terms of what happened in the games themselves. So we'll do some more work on that, but we'd analyse it in any event. But conventional wisdom would tell you nationally that fixtures of this nature can not necessarily do, can result in a higher level of domestic abuse, alcohol fueled or otherwise. So that's kind of the Euros, but we'll bring some further analysis back on that. I should say we did do a prevention campaign in a run to that. We knew that there was a risk, so it wasn't left alone. We were preventative, supporting victims as we would. And I should just say, picking up the conversations that you were saying, we have a high arrest rate at domestic abuse incidents. A high one, not just compared to other forces, but high. And 71% of all our arrests at domestic incidents are made within 24 hours to secure evidence and to provide the victim with some reassurance that we used to call it positive action. We don't anymore. That the police are serious about the nature of the crime, to give them space to think about the investigation and all that. So, you know, we continue to improve that. And I know we're talking about attrition rates and discontinuous rates earlier, and what we call outcome 16, basically victims not wanting to prosecute the case any further or be involved. But we do have a strong response at the front end, and both the chief and I are of the view that you know, we would think in simplistic terms that should translate to a better outcome rate, and it's understanding, like Graham's articulated, what's happening there. So that's the work we're currently doing. So that's the Euros. In terms of standards issues, if people have looked at the Force website, you'll have seen an increase in accelerated misconduct hearings. The reason for that is both due to criminal justice processes finishing on offences of criminality that officers have been accused of. So it's important to point out that when we run, it might appear sometimes, why is the misconduct taking place sometime after the offence? It's because it's prejudicial if we were to run it before a criminal trial. And criminal trials sometimes convict people and sometimes they don't. If they don't, we will still proceed with the misconduct. In fact, if they do, we will still proceed with the misconduct in police officer cases, because if officers are found of gross misconduct and dismissed, they then go on the barred list, which means they can't join policing anywhere else nationally. So in terms of a couple of accelerated misconduct hearings, and I'm quite happy to bring an update on this on each meeting if that's what's required. One related to a police staff member who was convicted of possession of indecent child imagery. They were dismissed. They've actually got a custodial sentence. That was investigated by the Force. By Durham Constabulary, but it was our employee, and we dealt with the misconduct and employment side. And then you'll probably see something in the media this afternoon relating to a PC who went to court for sexually assaulting a colleague whilst on duty. They were found not guilty at a criminal trial and subsequently resigned, but we have were dismissed last year on a vetting issue. We have still run the misconduct process recently to dismiss them, because although they were found not guilty on a criminal trial, the threshold for police misconduct is lower. It's balance of probabilities as opposed to beyond reasonable doubt. And they have been dismissed through a misconduct hearing, even though they've been dismissed already on the vetting. And the reason for that is, number one, that clearly, just to make it really clear, that kind of behaviour has no place in policing, and we'll deal with it, and it will go on the barred list as a result. And also, it's probably minimal for the victim, but some restitution, that there's some form of justice as a result, because it was a brave decision for the officer to report that in the first place. It's had a horrendous impact on her, ending a very promising career, but we'll deal with it. And people like that do not belong in the organisation.
Yeah. Thank you. Rural communities. Yeah.
The third one you asked me was around. So I picked up this through the BBC earlier this week. I think the Rural Crime Network produced it reflected back on a report, I think, produced in 2019 into domestic violence in rural communities and the level of service. I thought there was some really poignant observations in that report. The number of female officers in rural communities, for example, where victims could have confidence in reporting. The disparity in outcome rates in domestic violence within rural communities versus urban. And if I'm perfectly honest, that's not a way in which previously we have analysed our domestic abuse outcome rates. But having read it earlier in the week, I've asked Business Insight to do that work. So look at our rural communities, look at actually the level of reporting versus population. I think what we'll find is a level of underreporting, as we've already discussed, and then look at the outcome rates as a result. So we can shape our performance reporting around the themes of that report. So we have picked that up. But I know we alluded earlier to the value of the public safety service in partnership with other agencies. I think the Mayoralty could have a really key role to play in coalescing key partners. Health, police, fire are already collaborating on that in terms of what that could look like in terms of protecting the public, and we're fully supportive of that. We already collaborate with fire on it and have got an ambition, as we outlined earlier, to extend that service further.
Brilliant. Okay, that is work for us to progress from here, but that's really good. In which case, I think we should move on to the third parties report section. And just before we do, just to inform anyone who is watching this, the public questions, which we are due to come to after this section, because we're overrunning so much, and apologies, it's the perils of trying to be thorough in my first meeting. We will actually post written responses. This is not how I would usually want to do this, but because of time and the length of this meeting, we will actually post written responses to the public questions that we have shortly after the meeting, rather than doing it in the meeting itself. So I hope that's okay with people on the call, but it will just mean that we don't overrun even more than we already are. So we will do the third parties report section now, and then we will bring up the but we'll deal with the public questions. We can bring them up. I don't know whether we need to bring them up on a list on the call, or whether we can just publish answers afterwards. I don't know whether, Simon, you can just clarify what you think the best thing to do is.
Joe, what we will do is we'll work with the DCC and his colleagues at headquarters, and we will publish answers to those questions, if at all possible, before close of play today, so that viewers can have the almost live answers to them without us overrunning any further, as you've directed.
Yeah, great, thank you. In which case, we'll go back to the third party report section, and Scott, I think this is you again.
Yeah, sorry, you'll have to listen to me again. So obviously, just to explain to the public and yourself, that the deputy has responsibility for all things third party reporting, to ensure that the organisation, through the correct level of governance and oversight and assurance more than anything else, to test what we're saying we're doing and reporting to a number of different inspectorates. So people who've been watching this meeting for a while, and those interested in North Yorkshire Police and its progress, will have listened to a lot of updates focused on Peel and the National Child Protection inspections over the last 18 months. But it is broader than that. There are a number of other third-party reports, such as super complaints and different elements of internal assurance and audit that we need to demonstrate we're responding to. So the first part of this year really was looking at revisiting our governance arrangements to make sure that we're fit for purpose, because the scope can be so wide that it's important you've got proper coverage and oversight and scrutiny of what you need to. So that's been done. That's been embedded for the last 3 months. What's been done underneath that is a continuous improvement plan for the organisation and milestones that are really drawn from the recommendations and areas for improvement, AFIs as we would call them, that are contained within those reports. So we're seeing progress already on the latest Peel report that was issued and published in March, which was the one that was improved from the previous one. We're already seeing progress on those recommendations, and we'll report them in. And I know that time is limited here, but we are providing I'm providing a full report at Executive Board next week on the progress on that as a comprehensive report going there to yourselves, with obviously you as the chair. Just want to mention, so the one we've really focused on is improving the identification of vulnerability at the point of contact. So we referenced it earlier, how our call handlers thrive calls. We changed our methodology just as HMIC came in last year, which was the right thing to do, but perhaps just not the right timing. So they commented, if you'd stayed with your old model, you'd have been judged as really good, but you've changed it. It's the right thing to do, but we've found what we found. That model's now become embedded. We've got it to a level where we're consistently applying it so that callers get their risk and vulnerability thrived at the right point. And we do our own assurance to assure ourselves of that. So we'll be contacting HMIC and uploading our evidence, and that I'm very hopeful will be then addressed and closed. The National Child Protection Inspection has two outstanding elements on it. One relates to the quality of child protection investigations. The reason why that's still there is it's not just about what the police do. It's about how we interact with partners, how we share information through our vulnerability assessment teams and through our MASHs, and you'll be familiar with this through your experience in the local authority, to ensure that the right information at the right time is being shared and we have effective joint investigations, because that's really the test. If we were to get a J-tie, that's the space that we will be in. The police element historically has been around the number of detectives and our model for investigating child protection issues, and we moved to a different structure that was finalised in December of last year, but which still has capability gaps in terms of detectives. So until I am fully assured about the quality of the work that we're doing, and that's not to say we're not doing quality work, by the way, it's about saying consistency, assurance, that our partnerships are working effectively together, that we have the plan for the resourcing, which we do now, and I've been very clear with HMIC on this, and they do agree with us. It's at that point then we will write that inspection off. Some of it is dependent on getting the right number of resources into that model. And we've grown our own detectives, and they're in the pipeline for the end of the year. So that's really kind of, there's a governance picture around third-party reporting. We've addressed that. We've got a new exec team you're aware of. The two ACCs and the ACO have key roles in owning their own portfolios and driving that activity. And then the way we've restructured our business design and insurance function means we've got good coverage to give us the assurance. And if not, then we address it, because we know it's not perfect. And that's what assurance is designed to do, is to design us to hold a mirror up to the organisation, to challenge ourselves to be better.
Yeah. Just on the child protection investigations and working with partners, I don't properly know how that works currently, just in terms of what kind of regular meetings would you have with those local government partners, for example? So I assume it would be local government partners.
I mean, Graham will be as best placed as anyone to talk about the kind of operational and tactical. Strategically, of course, we've got safeguarding children's partnerships, which have undergone a revision through the new working together guidance. We've had joint events on how we take that guidance forward. That was facilitated by a national organisation that supports policing, about the meaning of that. There are questions in there about the role of independent chairs. Actually, it should be one of the organisations strategically chairing. I think the view of both DCSs, having worked with them both in my previous job, which was ACC Local Policing and Safeguarding, is there is great value in retaining an independent chair, because they challenge all the partners rather than one of them chairing and having the responsibility to do it. So that strategically, I think the relationships are strong. I think we challenge one another, both Martin and Stuart. Obviously, I have a good relationship between them. It's not always easy, but that's the nature of it. North Yorkshire Police have drastically improved, and this was reflected in the Peel inspection. how we submit safeguarding referrals, something we would call PPNs, public protection notices. And what that, of course, has now resulted in is a swell of demand into vulnerability assessment teams through the MASHs and everything. And we are going to have to consider as a partnership across agency about how we properly address that. And we're already starting to do that. So I think strategically, it's well embedded. North Yorkshire, a high performing authority in this arena. I know it's been more challenging in York for different reasons, but pleasingly they're working together as well. I think Martin will take that learning, won't he, and all the rest of it. But there's different financial context to both local authorities in that regard. Graham, I don't know whether you want to just flesh out a little bit, what that looks like daily, briefly. I mean, it's the relationships have definitely strengthened over the past 18 months, I would suggest.
Yeah, thank you, sir. And you're right to sort of divide it into two. The partnership in its broadest sense, has its challenge and its strengths, and as you've described, there is a really good level that sits underneath that, sort of at my level as well, interacting across children's social services and other partners as well, which gives us a really good opportunity to work through issues of policy and procedure and so on. The frontline demand, as Mr. Bissett's alluded to, I mean, to give you a sense, we're talking 150% increase in police protection notices over the last 12 months. In some ways, that's a great news story because it means the police are identifying risk much more effectively. But you're talking thousands of reports that need to be processed. The impact on our partners is equally huge. The fallout, I suppose, from that is then the child protection arrangements through sort of statutory meetings and so on has similarly grown enormously. At the moment, we are doing our best to keep all of that within the safeguarding command. So the detective sergeants who work in the MASH and the vulnerability assessment team attend almost all of those meetings, and they are really well placed. They're the subject matter experts to be able to deliver really effective child protection arrangements with partners. But it is a huge strain, and what that model looks like in the future, how it's resourced and funded, is clearly going to have to be subject to review, and we are conducting that review and at present, which will obviously come out in the fullness of time. The key thing, I think, from my perspective, out of that review, is making sure that we do it in collaboration and in partnership with children's services in particular. Because whatever we do will clearly impact them, and we've a vested interest to work really closely for the greater protection of the children of our communities.
And I know you work into time, Chair, but I think the other really thing that stands out for me when we talk about this is all hidden from the public to a great extent. So I know we talk about yellow jackets and the importance of neighbourhood police are absolutely fundamental to public confidence. That this is a huge, highly skilled area of policing that thankfully probably the vast majority never see. But it's so critical, isn't it, to get it right in terms of that hidden demand and harm and specialism, and we'd be more than welcome to facilitate anything you'd like around, come and look at anything in force really. But if it's an area you'd want to start on around child protection arrangements and how we work with partners, we'd be more than willing to facilitate that.
I think my concern really is just about how local authority partners, we can best support them given their own, particularly in York, not such a big issue in North Yorkshire, I don't think, just their resource challenges, and just how we kind of navigate that, to ensure that we aren't causing any undue additional burden, and whether or not, I guess, from a mayoral combined authority point of view, there's anything that could or should be done in that way, just in this particular area, because it is, as you say, it feels incredibly important. They probably don't want to see it, but they do want to know that children are being kept safe.
Yeah. If it's any reassurance, I think the feedback from partners would be, particularly North Yorkshire, would be to North York, you're now where you need to be. We gave you the feedback for a while professionally on these issues that we needed to improve, and we did, and you're now where you need to be. I think there's a broader question about this is the reality of child protection demand in the county, and how do we best together deal with it?
Yeah. Simon?
Joe, thank you. So I won't go into much detail on this, but just on the point around the combined authority, as a member of the leadership team at the authority, it's probably quite important to let the public know of the hard work that's going on behind the scenes to ensure that the combined authorities' economic development plans and strategies provide a coherent link across to the be safe and feel safe agenda, for which obviously you have responsibility to hold policing to account. So we are doing a lot of work to make sure that there is that key strategic link between economic well-being and protection and prevention and early intervention, which, without wishing to spoil the surprise, may very well, of course, be part and parcel of the relaunch of the police and crime plan and the fire and rescue plan, depending on what vision yourself and the Mayor wish to project through those plans.
Thank you. Yeah, I don't want to, let's not give the game away. Great, okay. Does anyone else have anything on the third-party reports for Scott or any of the policing colleagues who are on the call? In which case, huge apologies for my massive overrunning. I will just very briefly summarise who can be expecting written answers to be coming. So Pete from Fairburn, I think you were expecting a response around youth intervention. That will come in writing. Chris from Northallerton, there is a complaints and investigations response that you should be expecting from us. And in Thirsk, should be expecting a response around retail crime. Neil, actually got his location, but it's a drug dealing question. Ian, again, no location, but around antisocial parking. And Ian in Haxby, another question about antisocial behaviour. Huge apologies for not being able to deal with those in this meeting, but I have overrun already by an hour, which feels terrible chairing from me. But I was desperately trying to be thorough as well, which also felt important. So I think that is I will therefore draw this meeting to a close on the basis of those members of the public receiving a written response from us on those questions that they have raised with us. And I will endeavour to keep us to a better time at the next meeting, so that we can do those questions in live form as we normally do. Simon, sorry.
Chair, just to accept the kind of challenge, really, the officers do recognise that these meetings need to be scheduled to do justice to the breadth and depth of the topic. So the offer to the public is for us to extend the sessions routinely to 2 hours, so that that's more realistic. And so happy to take that that feedback and give you that commitment, Chair.
Brilliant, thank you. That's much appreciated. Thank you everyone for bearing with us. We didn't have a break, so you've all been sitting here for 2.5 hours. I hope people had water, because it's quite warm where I am. Thank you all for your time, and look forward to seeing you or your colleagues on future meetings.